you couldn't really tax them like that. Would you really want to throw them in jail for that? So one exception to this was a proposal by Henry George for a land tax. He said, rather than having property taxes, which discourage the construction of expensive, apartment buildings and stuff like that, why don't we just have a land tax? Tax you on the value of the land that you own. And the thing is, you can't get rid of your land. You can sell it to somebody else, but somebody else is going to have the land, right? Land isn't something you can change, basically. It's just there. And so you could raise a lot of money without doing any distortion by using a land tax. Yeah.
Doesn't the price of the land change when if you build something good on it? But
absolutely. The price of the land, what would basically happen with a land tax, if you say had a 5% per year land tax, is the price immediately would fall by the full amount of the land tax. And then people would, the first person who currently owns it would lose all the money, basically.
But I still don't, how is it any different than a property tax? Because a property tax, when you...
Is a property tax also includes the value of the house that's built on the property?
Doesn't the land tax also...
No, it would only...
The value, if you put a good property on it, the value of the land will increase.
Well, the idea was not really. I mean, if you assess, you could charge a land tax on the basis of that. So you could look in the similar area at what a house, something where they're going to have to knock down the house anyways because it's crappy or something like that is worth. So this is efficient, but it was never very popular. And Clementina, why do you think that it was never very popular?
Because because putting a land on the value of taxes does not consider the possibilities that you have for production. So you could still produce more in a particular land to increase the value of it. Well, some land does not have the same, so you can't compare it.
Yeah, I think that's about right. So I think the problem was people thought it was really inequitable. Like imagine that I'm a poor person and I have a big plot of land, but it's really underdeveloped because I can't afford to build anything on it. But this has been in my family for generations, right? Like now you're going to put this big tax on me and I'm going to be forced to sell my land. And a lot of people thought that was very unfair. So it never really got off the ground. Now, in practice, the real world interpretation of the second welfare theorem is a bit different, which is that because we can't do direct redistribution, the goal is rather that it should be as direct as possible. That is, taxes should fall on income or total consumption rather than on things like savings, which transfer money across time, or particular goods. Also, particularly it shouldn't affect the prices of different goods. So in many poor countries especially, the government to try to redistribute resources, subsidizes buying fuel or buying corn or something like this. And this is kind of crazy, right? It's it's not even clear that the poor buy that much more of this than the rich do, right? And it leads to way too much use of fuel relative to all the other things that people need. So it would be much better to just directly give poor people the money rather than leading them to buy a ton of fuel, which ends up bankrupting a lot of these countries. So, yeah.
But just giving money to the poor, wouldn't that just increase the amount of poor people because they don't have to work for the value?
Well, that's an extremely good point. That's what we'll be talking about. But the point is that if you're trying to get money to the poor, regardless of the way you do that, you're going to encourage people to be poor. But it's best that you don't also encourage them to waste a lot of money on fuel. You know what I mean? So there's going to be costs to doing it, but it's better to do it in the most direct way possible, even if it's not completely direct. Now, even when you do want to put taxes on particular goods, the logic is a lot more subtle than the logic behind these things standardly, which is that is related to what Clementina was saying, is you might want to give a subsidy for something like education. Because education is not useful to a poor person who's planning to be unemployed. Right? If you're unemployed, education is not very useful. If you're employed, it's very useful. Right? Or you might want to tax something like taking vacations in ritzy places. Because if you're a wealthy person, taking a vacation in a ritzy place is something that you do if you're being a playboy. And if you're being like a hardworking business person, you're unlikely to do that. So you might want to subsidize things. So it's more like what encourages you to work given a particular level of income, rather than what indicates what level of income you're at. Okay. So yeah, Ben.
But doesn't that unfairly like if you're taxing luxury vacations, you're now hurting everybody at a hotel, or like you're like they're now going to get less.
Well, but the thing is that it's offsetting the fact that you're taxing income, because when you tax income, you discourage people from working hard, right? And so you're sort of redressing what you were already doing. You see what I mean?
But you're kind of calling luxury vacations a vice.
No, you're not calling them a vice. You're just saying that they go along with being not working that hard. And so if they go along with not working that hard, then you can encourage people to work harder, which offsets the reduction in work that people do as a result of the income tax. You see, you're trying to like balance that
So
off.
raising the price of going on a vacation.
Yeah, if that goes along with not working hard. I mean, if it's a vacation that a lot of people who work hard go on, and there's other places, like maybe going for an extended stay at the Playboy Mansion or something, that like only people who like don't work do, then you'd want to tax those things and subsidize the other types of vacation. You see what I mean? Okay, so you probably in your earlier class and probably even today have gotten a sense that like the welfare theorems are like the case for the market economy, right? So the market does everything efficiently, so let's leave it alone. That's the way that most people usually interpret this. But in fact, the welfare theorems were not always interpreted that way. In some ways, they were interpreted very much opposite to that. So Jeff, is Jeff Bollinger here? No? Okay, so does anyone want to try to explain what the socialist interpretation of the welfare theorems was? Yeah.
Sort of do it, maybe. That there's a social planner who can implement the optimum like allocation of resources, and that if you just leave it up to a market, it will be inefficient. There'll be like more problems with it than the social planner.
Yeah, so they basically said, you know, the planner, the relevant conditions, right, are just that a bunch of things be tangent to one another, that you set things up that way. That doesn't require markets. I mean, you can do it through a market, but you can do it a lot of other ways too, right? And one way you could do it is by having like a central planning board that just tells everyone what they need to do. And markets in practice suffer from a lot of problems because there aren't an infinite number of people. There's market power. There's usually externalities. There's public goods. People make mistakes. These are all the things we're going to be talking about in the rest of the course. And socialism would be more efficient. It would be a better market economy because we'll just implement the market. There will be a big board that will say, what would the market prices be? And we'll just tell everybody what to do. You know, why do we want a market? The welfare theorems don't say anything in favor of market. In fact, they say that everything that the market does can be implemented just by making all these curves tangent to one another, right? So it's true that the welfare theorems say that we shouldn't deviate from the market allocation in stupid ways like, you know, subsidizing fuel and so forth. But they don't say, but they also say that we shouldn't deviate from the optimal socialist thing in little ways either. So they warn against sort of little stupid interventions, but they don't warn against the government taking over the whole economy. In fact, that could be superior. In particular, all those non-market, situations where I said that those were the same as the market economy, we know from those situations that you could have a very centralized system of allocating courses that's the same as the market economy, right? So the welfare theorems don't really favor capitalism or the market economy. They just say that there are certain stupid interventions that don't make very much sense. So if not, if this isn't what's good about markets, what is good about markets then? Shen?
Yes.
What does Hayek argue is the, or Varian talks about it as well, is the benefit of markets that, if not the welfare theorems?
It's that it transfers information in a way that is very difficult otherwise.
Yeah, so it basically argues that, this is a famous argument by von Mises and Hayek, which is that if a planner was going to make all these decisions, they'd have to have all the information. They'd have to know everything in order to do it. So And it's very hard to get this without prices. So imagine trying to build a railroad. This is a famous example from von Mises. And you're trying to decide, do I want to go around a mountain or do I want to tunnel through it? Which one's a more efficient way? Well, it's going to depend a lot on how much labor do each one of these takes, how much resources do I save, how much time do I save, what is the relative value of all those things? Well, you need to know how much people are willing to pay for a faster train. Well, you don't know that under socialism because there's no prices. And you need to know how much wood which it takes to build the tunnel is worth relative to steel, which it takes to build the train tracks. And you don't know that because under socialism there are no prices. So you'd have to have all this information to figure out what the relative value of those different things are. And that would be really, really hard. Whereas in a price system, there's sort of this impersonal force that's determining these prices, right? And each person only needs to do their one little thing. So a classic example of this is, nobody in the world knows how to make a pencil, right? So one person knows how to mine certain ores. And even there, not anyone knows how to mine the whole ore, right? But there's a group of people whose job is to mine the ore. And then there's another group of people who cut down the trees. And then there's another people who figure out how to put them together. And there's a bunch of different stages, and nobody even understands all those stages. And everyone can just look at the market prices and be good at doing their one little thing. And so fundamentally, the market acts as a process of putting information together. And that's really what its benefit is. So the real value, if market failures like monopoly and externalities are the costs of markets, the main benefit of markets is that they allow us to delegate to people these decisions. We don't have to make it as a centralized government. Every person can know their little thing well and forget about the rest. So as you'll see throughout the rest of the course, most of the problems that we're going to be dealing with are problems of how do we delegate in the right way to the right people? So for example, if we knew everyone's potential income, we would be able to redistribute really easily. But because we don't know everyone's potential income, we're going to have to use a more market-oriented system where we don't tax income so much. And the less we know about people's income, potential income, the less we're going to want to redistribute. Similarly, when we regulate companies, we'd like them to try to keep down their prices so that we, have prices near marginal cost, as we'll see. But if the company knows what its costs are, it's going to be very hard for us to do that. Because if we try to regulate the price down too low, they'll go bankrupt, right? Similarly, when we think about what's the best way to incentivize innovation, do we want to give patents, which have a lot of costs associated with them because they create monopoly, or do we want to just give out prizes? Well, prizes would work if we knew how much each innovation was actually worth. But patents, the value of them is they help us figure out what the thing is worth, because the money that people make depends on how many people are willing to purchase it. Similarly, when we think about how much information to give to consumers about products, you could either put very blunt warning labels on various products, or you could give the consumer a bunch of detailed information, have them go through and process it all, and then determine what they're going to do. And this depends on what's useful to the consumer. If the consumer is like an expert in this product category, they might want a ton of detailed information, right? Because they're going to be very good at processing that relative to someone else. But if the consumer doesn't really know much about it, then a very blunt warning label is going to be more useful to them. Right? So basically, market distortions mean that centralization is better, except for the fact that there's this diffused information. And so really what justifies capitalism rather than socialism is not the welfare theorem. It's the fact that it's hard to get all the information and computation together into one place. And to the extent that that becomes easier, capitalism is going to become less attractive, because there's all these distortions that we know are associated with it that we can overcome if we're able to have a centralized, efficient system. So as more information becomes public in the information age, the importance of this specialized local knowledge that people have is rapidly going down. Most knowledge